Today is August 12th, 2015, and it is my pleasure to be speaking this afternoon with Lee Miller. Lee has held numerous roles throughout his career in connection to land use, including as Director of Lane County Planning Department and as the Chair of the Oregon Planning Directors Association. My name is Kevin Pozzi, and I am the Program Manager for the Oregon Planning Forum, which is housed within the College of Urban and Public Affairs here at Portland State University. Lee, we're honored to have you here and willing to sit down with us today. We're hoping to gather as much information as we can from the people who were influential in forming and shaping Oregon's land use system over these past, now 42 years, I believe. We're aiming to document the stories, anecdotes, and experiences of the people who were involved back then, as well as to get your thoughts on how the system has evolved and where you think it might be headed in the years to come. We encourage you to share anything you feel is relevant to this effort. So, let's begin. I was hoping that you might be able to start by just giving a little bit of a background, personal or professional, with Oregon's land use system.
Okay, I came to Lane County in 1969. I had worked 5 years in California in county planning and became the planning director in '69. That was the year I believe Senate Bill 10 had been passed, with the requirement for cities and counties to have plans. And I was fortunate to come into a situation where voluntarily in the metropolitan area of Eugene, Springfield, the three jurisdictions there had already embarked upon a joint effort metropolitan plan. It became known as the 1990 plan. And that, just as I came to Oregon in 1969 in Lane County, that was about the time that the citizen group put out its proposal, and it took 2 to 3 years for that to go through the machinery of changes and revisions and acceptance on all sides to finally have a plan. And that happened sometime before, I believe, Senate Bill 100 was passed, real close proximity. And I had my land use education was at the University of Washington. I had a sociology degree and then one in urban and regional planning. Went on to California in San Joaquin County and then came to Lane County.
And I know you had been a member of some professional organizations, if you wanted to talk about that involvement.
It was at the time it was American Institute of Planners. There was a Northwest chapter, Oregon, Washington. Then at some point in time in the 70s, it split into respective Oregon and Washington chapters. And I was a member and I was active, but I didn't have any office in that organization. The Planning Directors Association was more or less a self-put-together self-help group of trying to just check with each other on how to get the job done. And there were times when we also had the opportunity to reflect back to the DC Conservation Development staff on proposals that they were coming forth with.
And so what period in years was your involvement in land use or in whatever in Lane County?
1969 to 1982.
Well, obviously that encompasses Senate Bill 100. I was wondering if you believe LCDC that was created from this legislation acted correctly in carrying out the objectives that SB 100 had laid out.
I think it was a tough go for them with all the powers that be and skepticism. So they've done a good job. And as I mentioned to you earlier, I haven't really been keeping that close tab since '82. I was in another field of work. What I got out of the newspaper is pretty much what I've been able to follow about planning since. But I think given the obstacles and the forces against it and withstanding the votes several times to either cripple or dismantle, I think they've done a good job. There were times when we argued a lot with them on approaches, but not on their main mission.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any experience or anything you wanted to touch on, anecdotes or whatnot, from the time when the passage of the bill was going through?
I remember one time when, as a result of the new laws, we had to get into a update. That is, we being Lane County, Springfield, and Eugene jurisdictions of the metropolitan plan. And there was a time where we had, and I can't remember the issue, but various staff people were up at Salem working with the staff up there and told we absolutely had to do something. There was no way around it. That wasn't very acceptable to the local jurisdictions, certainly not Lane County. That was, of course, my boss. And we said, no, when we went back and reported, we have to do this particular, take this particular action. And the county board got real upset and had Wes Kavarson come down and do a very public meeting. And he sat there and said, oh no, we'd never make you do anything like that. And I can remember the trust factor dropping real quick, and both with our staff and our elected officials and our relationship with the LCDC staff.
You know, Lane County, at least geographically, is one of the more diverse counties in the state. I mean, all the way from the Cascades to the coast, which I think is pretty unique in the.
It was the only jurisdiction that had to adhere to all 19 goals, with the Greenway thrown in the coastal. No other county has that situation.
Do you believe that there, you know, with 19 goals, do you think that any of them have been more important to the program, or maybe not quite as important?
Well, I think the urbanization goal and the agricultural goal, and to a lesser extent probably the forestry goal, those went hand in glove to be able to withstand the pressures on development in the rest of the county. And it was mostly county's job under the goals to more or less hold the line until city development could be over time marched out to the growth boundaries as they became revised and extended. And the boundaries don't seem to have need to have been changed in our neck of the woods. In Eugene, Springfield, they're still holding pretty much to the original boundaries. There's been some expansion, I believe, for industrial purposes. Not a lot for residential. They're just considering a concept that we had 40 years ago of reserve. Still, sometime, but not yet.
Was there any particular goals that you had to focus on in particular during your time period there?
Well, we spent a lot of time with the Greenway goal.
It's not a goal that you hear much about.
And there's been just a couple of issues that come up lately in Eugene, Springfield area. One having to do with the development of the property that the Eugene Water and Electric Board is turning back to the city in some fashion or for development. It appears maybe the city will take over, and a development that the university had along the river close to the campus, main campus, that drew a lot of criticism for the way the development was proposed. Neither of those went forward. Well, they're still working on the Eugene Water and Electric Board property. That will happen in some fashion, but it's got a lot of constraints besides the Greenway concerns.
Are any of the goals you felt like maybe haven't lived up to their stature or weren't as focused on maybe as originally intended?
I don't have a good feel for that, again, because I haven't been directly involved. I think sort of I think you're going to get to a question of what's missing. And I don't know if anything's missing, but an emphasis maybe that wasn't really understood. That had to do, of course, with at least reacting to climate change. And certainly there's a lot of efforts to try to influence various factors that do affect climate, but at least to be in a better position to react, in addition to the where we have in coastal goals with tsunami. There was an initial interest and concern about dealing with potential tsunamis. Perhaps there's something that indirectly I think the tools are there to deal with it, but perhaps there might be a focus of an additional goal that could pull it all together. I mean, again, not being that involved with it anymore, I just raised that question as a matter of curiosity.
What's been your career after land use?
I went to work for the State Department of Justice, and for the most part, I was the personnel manager. I had an opportunity to go work for Dave Fromeyer, and my job had been cut at Lane County, and there was a big budget crunch, and mid-management positions were cut, and I had one of those, and so had an opportunity to work for Dave Fromeyer, and from that I evolved into being the personnel manager in the department.
So we've touched on this just a little bit, but what goals or topics might be missing? I mean, I know at the time, obviously climate change wasn't quite on people's radars, but when administering the system in your role, were there any issues that came up that you didn't feel like the goals helped to address, or topics that would have been beneficial at the time?
No, I think the bigger issues were not that there weren't tools to use, but differences of opinion on how to go about doing it. Most of our issues were having to do with the mechanics and certain rules, policies that were proposed and how they might be accomplished. And again, I'm really short on details, and I apologize for that, but those are my overall recollections. That we had lots of discussions, we being either from the local staff dealing with the staff up there, or through the Planning Directors Association. I also was on a committee that Wes Cabarson had, and he put together from time to time and changed. I was one of the initial people on a local staff advisory committee. And pretty soon, I think they got tired of hearing from us and didn't put our efforts into much in terms of, they more or less, it became a show to just have us come up there once a month and sit down and tell us what was going on, but hopefully go home soon. There was a lot of, they had to deal with a lot of things and to be harped on a lot. To get old, I'm sure.
In 1974, as you're more than familiar, LCDC and DLCD undertook an unprecedented public outreach and involvement effort in adopting the first 14 of the goals. Do you think this was worth doing? Do you think that it affected at all the thinking and views that you had at the time?
Well, I'm certain it was worth doing. Giving people an opportunity, as well as some new people who hadn't been involved, an opportunity to participate, and for people who had a lot of concerns to see what was going on and to be able to see that there were people in support as well. That it wasn't just a whole lot of people in opposition. To go to meetings and find out there were people on both sides of the issues. But also to point out the interest in particularly farmland, saving farmland. That hadn't come out much in our county. And it gave some of the folks, we did a lot of our own when we had to put our plan together a little bit later, working with ranges, and at least having them host meetings as we had to go about piece by piece in the county doing the planning for the various parts. That the Granges were helpful in pulling people together. And that sort of followed up the same idea of the land use outreach and the LCBCN.
Again, what you learned from those outreach efforts, did that change at all or bring up anything that you maybe hadn't previously thought about, or a viewpoint that did
I
not work
can't
out?
remember for sure. I think we had to react to some things as well, but not in a major way. It was just trying to go through and get the job done. We had, as I recall, something like 12 sub-areas of the county to deal with and the metropolitan area. And in Wayne County, we had an anomaly of a second planning commission, being the coastal commission, that the county had adhered to some concerns and nobody was paying attention to the people on the coast. And so the county set up a second planning commission. So issues, plans, zoning, whatever we were dealing with that were countywide had to go through both commissions and bring things together. And not always were they together, so we were busy running back and forth between both sides of the coastal range and trying to pull that all together.
Goal 1, citizen involvement, is considered by many as critical to the development and execution of the planning program here in Oregon. Do you feel like this goal is still relevant today, and why might that be?
Again, I'm not in that much touch today. I remember back 30 years ago that my feeling about citizen involvement was the best way to become involved was to become involved with, or at least attach oneself to an interest group of your choice and let the interest group carry the mail, because individuals, I don't think, were that effective. It was the various interest groups, whether it be the 1,000 Friends or the homeowners, whatever. And particularly as it came to testifying on actions that were being carried by the various local legislative bodies, being attuned to how to play the game, so to speak. What was relevant, how to write up proposed findings and conclusions and so on. It became a fairly highly skilled operation. And again, I think that it was most effective to find the interest group that met your particular point of view and support it with money and work with it and hope that it was carrying the ball for you.
You know, I think many might argue that interest groups today are part of the polarization that we see, you know, both in the land use system, but in just the political process in general. So there's that the main avenue, though, to make change sounds like it might be through an interest group.
I will say about the interest groups early on, it's my remembrance that the work that came out of McPherson's committee had to undergo significant changes to be acceptable by the legislature, and the folks that pulled that off were the main interest groups getting together somewhat behind locked doors and making the compromises necessary to get the legislators to pass the bill. And I don't think that the folks that were on the original committee were, we got something out there for them to dig into, but it was the interest groups that worked together and got it done.
Are there, I mean, obviously the ways that we connect with people and execute citizen involvement might look different today than it would have 30 or 40 years ago. Were there certain ways that, you know, in Lane County, for instance, you guys did citizen involvement that you found particularly effective, or in what you were trying to carry out?
We didn't, most of the citizen involvement came through by the initiative of really the local jurisdiction, the staff. We did have the county put together a program where there were local citizen involvement committees, but not just for planning. But at the time they were concentrating mostly on planning, and most of them probably got started because of an interest in planning. They wanted to be useful in various other aspects of county government, and then when money became less and less available, I think, that effort to support those groups. To the goals, that effort was very useful. We could have the county had a coordinator of those groups, and so being able to get that coordinator to help us and give us some insight also was useful.
And today, I'm not sure if you participate at all in any citizen involvement activities, but I imagine again that they look quite different than they might have in the past. And if you think that those current efforts are effective, I mean, whether it's through social media or are we entering a different age of citizen involvement, different ways to do outreach?
I don't really know. I did follow the local effort in the last 2 or 3 years that the city of Eugene went through, but not personally. I basically followed in the newspaper. And city manager, that was unusual. The city manager was the primary organizer and coordinator for that whole effort. And previously that would have come out of planning commissions and planning staff working with the city council. Managers usually were watching what was going on and making sure that they were comfortable with staff efforts, at least in those activities. This was a little different in terms, and I don't know how reflective that is around the state, but the city manager put together the vision, the process, and then the vision that came from that process. So I think he's the prime leader of that.
Just as Lane County, encompasses everything from the coast to the Coast Range, the Valley, and the Cascades. Obviously, Oregon encompasses an even larger geography and population base. And was just wondering if you thought if the statewide planning goals struck the right balance between state and local control that LCD had originally intended in 1974.
I think there was a realization of the differences over time. And initially there was a one-size-fits-all approach to doing a lot of things. And if not compromising, at least, if not recognizing, at least compromising with the political realities that there had to be some different approaches. We, in Lane County, because we had a heavy end of urbanization, we didn't have to deal with that so much, or weren't a part of it, but I could see that was happening, particularly in central and eastern Oregon.
Any examples in particular that you might remember throughout your time of issues or concerns?
I think dealing with forest lands, for one, and recognizing as well that in agricultural lands, everything outside the growth boundary that on a map that wasn't necessarily good agricultural land. And that part did hit home in Lane County. We had to deal with the agricultural land problem. They had a pretty extensive effort of even hired a soil scientist to map the whole county. But there were limitations of strictly going with a certain number of just soil classifications, saying that's good agricultural land, or it isn't, strictly on the nature of the soil. A lot of other factors that whether or not it was.
And that mapping has been successful, in terms of the area that has been preserved?
Well, the county actually went through the acknowledgement process even after I left. I left in 82 and might have been 83 or 84 when it was finally acknowledged. So I think they had to, Lane County was involved with a major effort that I think failed in terms of getting some recognition of a lesser treatment of some agricultural lands. What they were able to accomplish was a lot less than what they were going for. And I remember a person I had worked with who was the head of another division led that particular effort for the county. In fact, they assigned him full-time to try to get that through, and I think it was not successful.
So in what ways have prominent state and local officials or ballot measures or other actions by the Oregon legislature undercut or maybe even advanced the original purposes of SB 100, political fights, whatnot?
The fire seems to have diminished a lot from what I see, again, I'm sitting in left field on this a lot, but you don't see the statewide efforts anymore in terms of curtailing or cutting it back. You see the various fights about growth boundaries, and particularly in the Portland metropolitan area I read about. But I don't see, I think it's been accepted as that's a part of Oregon now. And a lot of people who are gone now, of course, who felt that that wasn't a proper way to have their land treated.
You feel like after Measure 37 and 49, those might have calmed down, those fights?
Well, they seem to be. They don't come forward in any major way, and I don't see the interest groups like the home builders. They're of course they're working on individual efforts to be sure that there's enough buildable land for residential purposes or industrial purposes, but they're working within the system rather than trying to change the system, it appears.
So on a related topic, I mean, you've spent now a few decades outside of land use as a career or directly working in the Oregon land use system, and of course a few decades before that directly working within it. Has your view of the system changed either with time or just being outside of the system? I mean, do you feel like you were inside of it and it really was something that you could work with, and once you left, you looked at it from more the eyes of a citizen?
Well, that's a good way to put it, and I think that over time, the questions and issues I had, which work in with how to, rather than major principles, that I also look back and think that's probably a lot of time spent and could have been better spent doing it differently than always seeming to be fighting the little battles.
Any in particular?
No. Mm-hmm. I remember a lot had to do with various proposed rules, particularly in the Greenway. And without being able to remember particular, I think we were able to get some concession on a number of things. It just didn't seem practical to do. I'm sorry I'm giving you generalities, but it's been over 30 years since I've been involved, and I haven't been following it, even as a citizen, as much as I thought I might.
Do you think that Oregon's land use program today, or in 2015, compares with what was envisioned 4 decades ago? Whether as a citizen, whether as someone who was working in the field, do you feel like it really has met what it originally saw?
I think so, yes.
Mm-hmm. Anything in particular? Any reasons why that?
Just the lack of apparent major controversy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see major changes being proposed by those who are strong proponents of planning, nor big efforts to try to weaken it.
Any reasons in particular you think this system may not have been exported to other states? I mean, we're rather unique in having this system.
No, I don't. I did have a lot of discussions with a friend who worked for me and went to work in Washington. And he went to work he left Lane County planning staff, started his own private consulting firm, and then went to work for a forest industry lobby group in Washington. And I remember him telling me it was a whole different approach, and why he felt from his new vantage point that it was a better system than Oregon's. And I can't remember the details on how it principally differed from the Oregon system. And you're right, it appears that not many other states have appeared to want to adopt it. I know that California, where I had worked for 5 years, had a whole system of planning requirements and there shall be and so on, but the enforcement of it was not there. I think the enforcement at the state level is, as much as it chaffed a lot of people, that's what's made it have the long run that it's had. And I'm sure that it changed over time in reacting. I was friends with and went to work for Stan Long before he became the chairman, and I would believe he was much different in operating the commission than, say, L.B. Davis.
Do you feel like your education and planning back in the 1960s, I believe, prepared you for the field?
With limitations, because I went into graduate school with no practical experience. And I could see that my classmates who had gone out and worked and came back, or who were working while they were going to school, had a much better appreciation of what they were learning about than I did. And I had to make a response on a survey to the planning school once. Not within 5 years after I graduated, and I had to make that major confession that I'm not sure I got as much out of it. I'm sure that I didn't get as much out of it. The education was there, but if I would have been able to put it together with more practical experience, I would have gotten a lot more out of it.
So we talked about climate change a little bit. Are there other changes or additions to the planning laws that you feel like would enable our system to, face the challenges of the future?
I don't have any suggestions that along those lines. I would guess that there certainly are. I'd be interested in hearing other people who are in the field talk about those. I don't have a first-hand feeling for that.
Was there a particular topic or interest that drew you into planning?
Well, I was sailing along in sociology. What am I going to do with a sociology degree? And along about the tail end of my junior year, I took an introductory course in planning from the head of the planning school, very dynamic. And at the same time, I took an introductory course from the head of the school of social work, both of them having graduate programs, who was real competent but not dynamic. And so that took me to planning from there. And that excited me at the time. And it was an exciting field, and at the time it was a young person's field. I'm not sure now what it's like. But a lot of people who stayed in it for a while, they would leave and go off and do other things, as eventually I did.
In the Department of Justice.
Yeah.
So is there other topics that we may have missed, or questions, any anecdotes or stories you'd like to share?
No, and I did try to do some preparation for this one back, and looked at the timelines and read the other two interview transcripts you sent to me, and that jogged some things. That was helpful. I think one of them, well, you asked just a couple of minutes ago my interest, and one of the things that drew me to planning, and once I found out what it was about, it was coincidental at the time. The reason I took the planning course was I, again, was wondering what am I going to do with myself after I graduate college, and I had two friends that were a couple of years ahead of me who were architects, and the planning school and the School of Architecture were in the same school. Planning was a small part of College of Architecture, and they said, why don't you look at planning? And I did, and it took me. And one of the things that I felt was important in terms of the effort of planning, particularly at urbanization, is the efficiency of infrastructures. Basically, cost of public facilities and services, and compact growth certainly had a lot to do with maximizing that effort. And it appears that while it might have didn't have major emphasis, the fact of the urbanization goal coming along, and then the recent stress on public finances, there's been a major benefit that's been realized just from the effort of planning in other areas towards the minimization of spending too much money that wasn't going to be there anymore to take care of the people who wanted to put urban subdivisions way out and extend water and services, water and sewer facilities and transportation and so on. It's all been realized maybe indirectly.
Was Lane County facing a lot of growth when you were there in the 1970s?
In the peripheries of the metropolitan area. And there was a lot of development outside of the two major cities in unincorporated area. And that pretty well came to a halt and much of it's been annexed, particularly in River Road, Santa Clara area, with the city's sewer expansion and the halt of being able to develop a lot of the remaining land that was available for housing until there were sewers. So that was helpful.
Any thoughts on how we might be able to finance infrastructure going forward? I mean, it doesn't have to be a technical analysis. I'm just curious if with your experience, we are facing an infrastructure finance challenge.
Well, they seem to be putting a lot of emphasis on the developer. A major development close to Valley River in Eugene that is multi-housing of different types. They were required to widen the primary overpass serving that area. That's something that would have happened a long time ago. Certainly, major street improvements leading into and widening the arterials close by and so on. But that was more extensive than I would realize, and I think that's probably something that's going to have to be done more.
Is that fair?
It's more fair than having the people experience the problem or pay for it out of non-existent road funds monies.
Well, again, are there anything else you'd like to touch on before we close the interview?
I'm sure I'll think of things later. Wished I would have said this, or wish I would have said that.
Well, thank you again for coming by.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yes.
I enjoyed the opportunity just to think back.
Great. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Lee.
Thanks, Kevin.